Welcome everyone to another edition of the Classic Comic Archive, a series where I recap and review many of Marvel Comics' most seminal early issues. Our story for today is Journey into Mystery 85, cover dated October of 1962. This issue marks the first appearances of several prominent Asgardians, such as Heimdall the Gatekeeper and Loki the God of Mischief. Also included are cameo appearances of the warriors Balder and Tyr, as well as the ruler of Asgard, Odin. The issue was written by Stan Lee and Larry Lieber, and drawn by Jack Kirby and Dick Ayers. Our issue opens up with a striking splash page, showing our titular hero in the throes of an epic battle against his treacherous half-brother Loki. Yet before we can witness such an epic confrontation, we must first travel to the mythical realm of Asgard, the citadel of the Norse gods from which both Thor and Loki were born. A sweeping realm, Asgard is home to a heavenly city, as well as a serene natural landscape. Within a remote corner of this landscape lies a lone tree. Yet this is not any normal tree, as it has actually been the prison of Loki, the god of mischief, for centuries. Condemned to remain in the tree for eternity, only a tear shed at his expense could possibly free him. Yet Loki is reviled across Asgard, and none bear sympathy for his plight. But as his title implies, the trickster is one for clever antics and has hatched a plot to escape his imprisonment. Having been in the tree for such a long time, Loki has slowly managed to gain control over its branches. And thus, just as Heimdall, the mighty ward of the Bifrost, walks by, Loki forces a branch to wrestle free a leaf, one that lands right into the eye of the gatekeeper, and forces from him a lone tear. With the terms of his imprisonment fulfilled by its shedding, Loki escapes the tree undetected, and vows to get revenge on the one responsible for his centuries-long plight. His half-brother Thor. Centuries earlier, when he had last encountered Thor, Loki cleverly established a mental link with the Thunder God's mighty hammer, a link that now allows him to trace its location at any moment. Using this mental link, Loki discovers that his half-brother is on Earth, entertaining a group of sick children. With this location in mind, Loki accesses the Bifrost, a legendary rainbow bridge that grants the gods of Asgard access to Earth. Traveling to New York City, Loki magically disguises himself in modern clothing and heads off to find the hospital where he had seen Thor. Arriving at the hospital, Loki learns that Thor had already left. Yet undeterred, the god of mischief heads back outside onto a busy street and decides he'll lure out his half-brother by causing some mischievous mayhem. Gifted in the ways of magic, Loki transforms a few streetgoers into negatives of themselves. The now negative people begin crying out in horror, and their pleas are heard by the nearby Dr. Don Blake and his nurse Jane Foster. Dr. Blake, who outwardly appears to be a frail and meek man, secretly possesses the power to transform into the mighty Thor. Slinking away from any lurking eyes, Blake stamps his ancient cane once on the ground to trigger such a transformation and save the innocent victims of Loki's treacherous prank. Arriving at the negative people, Thor unveils a new power of his mighty hammer, as he uses it to blow antimatter particles their way, which cures them of their odd affliction. Jane Foster then quickly rushes to Thor's side and vocally admires his great deed. It seems that after having been saved by the Thunder God in the last issue, the young nurse has developed a potent crush on the mighty Asgardian. Yet Jane isn't the only one to approach Thor, as Loki ominously greets his half-brother while still disguised as a mortal. Not recognizing the trickster god, Loki jolts Thor's memory by shedding his mortal guise and confidently announcing his lust for vengeance. By challenging his half-brother to battle, Thor feels he has no choice and accepts the challenge. Yet Loki is tired of being in the presence of insignificant mortals and calls on his half-brother to meet him in the sky. Thor obliges and whirls his hammer above him as if they were helicopter blades, a technique that lifts the mighty warrior high in the sky. Yet this was all part of the trickster god's plan, as Loki has maneuvered Thor in such a position that the sun's rays reflect off of his hammer and into his eyes. This blinking reflection, and Loki's natural powers of suggestion, allow the god of mischief to hypnotize Thor and make him his unwitting servant. With the mighty Thor now under his control, Loki decides that his half-brother will suit him well as an instrument of mischief. He commands Thor to return to the ground, which the thunder god obeys without hesitation. The two Asgardians then arrive in a park, where Loki realizes he must separate Thor from his mighty hammer while he still has the chance. Loki commands his half-brother to hand over the weapon, but Thor disobeys, saying that the will of Odin, king of the Norse gods, forbids him from ever resting over his hammer. Thus Loki realizes that he must resort to trickery to gain control of the weapon, and orders Thor to hurl it at a fictitious monster hiding in a nearby river. Yet before Loki has a chance to retrieve the hammer, it magically returns to its mighty wielder, an unyielding trait of the weapon that the trickster god evidently forgot about. Undeterred, Loki next conjures up an illusory image of Thor himself, and asks his half-brother to hand his hammer over to the image. In his hypnotic trance, the mighty Thor falls for the trick and hands off his hammer to the illusion. With his triumph over Thor seemingly secured, Loki next orders the thunder god to set free a group of caged lions at a nearby zoo. Thor heads off to fulfill Loki's command, yet as he is, the trickster god finds himself distracted by a group of people trying to lift Thor's hammer, which of course had slipped right through the illusion's hands and fell to the ground. Yet as Loki mocks the foolish mortals, he fails to notice Thor's transformation back into Dr. Donald Blake, as previous issues have established that if Thor is without contact with his hammer for more than 60 seconds, he will be forcibly transformed back into the frail physician. Yet Loki's hypnosis has no sway over Dr. Blake, who rushes out of the zoo to retrieve his mighty hammer and once again transform into Thor. Doing just that, the Thunder God, now free of Loki's influence, confronts his treacherous half-brother and vows to finish their battle. Yet Loki knows he's no match for Thor's might and begins fleeing. He magically summons all of the pigeons in the area to coalesce around him, which creates a flying carpet out of the birds that allow him to fly away. Yet by hurling his hammer, Thor too can fly, and its speed's far greater than any group of pigeons. Realizing Thor will soon catch up to him, Loki disembarks from his pigeon plane and rushes into a crowded theater. Thor pursues the trickster into the theater and finds him gloating on its stage. But Thor doesn't dare hurl his hammer at Loki, lest he accidentally harm one of the innocent patrons within the packed theater. Instead, Thor climbs onto the stage himself, ready to defeat his foe with his bare strength. Yet as always, Loki has a trick up his sleeve, as he magically releases the stage's curtains from their supports to smother Thor and give him an opportunity to escape. But Loki fails to trap Thor for very long, as the thunder god produces a powerful gust of wind from his own breath and casts away the curtain. Nonetheless, Loki is able to escape the theater and flees into a nearby subway tunnel. As Thor pursues Loki into the subway, the treacherous trickster shoves two innocent passerbys onto the tracks of an incoming train. Thus our mighty hero abandons his pursuit of Loki and rushes to save his victims. Yet there isn't enough time to remove them off the tracks, so Thor uses his incredible strength to bend the tracks over the passerbys, which allows the subway car to travel harmlessly over them. With the people saved, Thor resumes his pursuit of Loki and heads outside. There he finds the god of mischief riding a flying horse, which is actually an oil company's mascot brought to life. Yet Thor's now in Times Square, and he once again restrains himself from whirling his hammer in such a crowded area. While Thor is helpless to stop him, Loki crashes his flying horse into a billboard advertising the theater from earlier. Yet unsatisfied with the relatively small scale of this mayhem, Loki flies to the Statue of Liberty for his next scheme. Thor pursues his half-brother to the statue, but instead of flying up to confront the menace head-on, the thunder god cleverly hurls at Loki a large pipe from a nearby construction site. The pipe perfectly strikes Loki, causing the trickster god to get stuck within and fall off his horse. Crashing into the New York Bay, Loki's powers are rendered inert as according to legend, his magic is useless in water. Thus Thor dives into the bay to save his half-brother, who would drown within the pipe otherwise. Back onto shore, Loki is now secured tightly within Thor's iron grip. And seeing as he's still wet from his plunge, his powers are still useless. With his half-brother in tow, Thor flies to the Empire State Building and in an incredible feat of strength, hurls his hammer with Loki holding on, which climbs into space and reaches Asgard itself. There the hammer drops off the trickster in front of the consortium of Norse gods and returns to Thor all within a minute. The issue subsequently ends as we see Dr. Blake back with his nurse Jane, who's in awe at the mythical battle she'd just seen. She tells the doctor how dull her life is in comparison. Blake half-heartedly agrees, although remarks it's a matter of perspective. That concludes Journey into Mystery issue 84 and another episode of the Classic Comic Archive. But as always, I would like to offer a brief review of this issue. Overall, I thought that this was another solid story from Marvel, but left a little to be desired. I specifically praised the last issue for its focus on character development, as it managed to strike a balance between the lives of Dr. Blake and Thor. In that regard, I think this issue was a bit of a reversal of course. Pretty much the entire story was a battle between Thor and Loki, which mind you, was definitely the best in the series so far. But I personally found myself somewhat disappointed in how little Dr. Blake or Jane factored into this story. As for the introduction of Loki, I certainly found him to be the most menacing villain so far, although I do hope future stories establish a more concrete set of abilities, as I thought some of his powers were a little convenient story-wise. I also have to ask, has Loki's weakness to water ever been referenced again? I have to assume that it hasn't, because otherwise couldn't Thor just summon a rainstorm anytime he faces off against him, something he's certainly going to be doing a lot more of in this series. In any case, let me know what you thought of this issue and the video, and feel free to suggest other classic comics for me to cover. Thanks for watching.